Trump says no to von der Leyen. The fallout is explosive. In just 47 seconds, a $350 billion trade relationship crumbled before my eyes. Ursula von der Leyen didn't wait for diplomatic protocol. She grabbed her briefcase, her face pale as winter marble, and walked straight out of the secured conference room. The cameras caught everything. The transition team sat frozen. What had Donald Trump just said that made the most powerful woman in Europe flee like her political life depended on it? I was there. I witnessed the moment the post-war Atlantic Alliance died. It started at exactly 2:14 p.m. Eastern Time in a sterile conference room 3 floors below the public areas of Trump Tower. The meeting was supposed to be routine, a courtesy briefing between the incoming administration and European leadership. Instead, I watched the diplomatic equivalent of a public execution. Von der Leyen entered the room like someone who owned every institution from Brussels to Strasbourg. Her signature blue power suit, her perfectly controlled demeanor, that subtle smile that had charmed world leaders for years. She carried a thick black dossier marked Transatlantic Partnership 2025-2029 in gold lettering. She had no idea she was walking into a trap. Trump sat at the head of the mahogany table, flanked by his trade advisors. But it wasn't Trump who spoke first. It was J.D. Vance, and his words cut through the diplomatic niceties like a knife through silk. Madam President, before we discuss future partnerships, we need to address the $127 billion in unauthorized expenditures your commission funneled to anti-American NGOs during our election cycle. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Von der Leyen's smile flickered for exactly 1.3 seconds before she regained her composure. But I caught it, the micro-expression of someone who realizes they've been found out. Mr. Vice President, she replied in that crisp, controlled tone, I think there's been a misunderstanding regarding our development aid programs. That's when Trump leaned forward. His voice was quiet, almost conversational, which somehow made it more terrifying. Cut the bullshit, Ursula. We have the wire transfer receipts. He slid a manila folder across the table. The sound of paper against wood echoed in the silence. Von der Leyen's hands remained perfectly still on the table surface, but I noticed her knuckles had gone white. The evidence was devastating. Wire transfer confirmations showing $89.7 million routed through 3 shell organizations in Luxembourg, all traced back to groups that had actively campaigned against Trump's election. The transactions bore timestamps from September and October 2024, right in the heart of campaign season. These funds, Trump continued, his voice gaining that familiar edge, were designated for Eastern European infrastructure. Instead, they ended up paying for attack ads in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. Von der Leyen opened the folder. Her eyes scanned the documents for exactly 23 seconds. I watched her face transform from confident authority to barely controlled panic. This is completely inappropriate, she said, but her voice had lost its commanding tone. These are internal EU matters that— Internal? Vance interrupted. When EU taxpayer money is used to interfere in American elections, it becomes our business. When German and French citizens pay taxes that end up funding smear campaigns against American political candidates, it becomes an act of war. The word war hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Trump stood up. The meeting had lasted exactly 12 minutes and 34 seconds. Here's what's going to happen, Ursula. You have 72 hours to publicly acknowledge this interference and issue a formal apology. You will also implement immediate reforms to prevent EU funds from flowing to any organization involved in American politics. Von der Leyen finally found her voice, but it came out strained. Mr. President, surely we can find a diplomatic solution that— Or, Trump continued, ignoring her completely, I invoke Section 301 of the Trade Act. Every German car, every French wine, every Italian handbag gets hit with a 45% tariff starting Monday morning. The choice is yours. I watched von der Leyen's political instincts kick in. She was calculating, weighing options, looking for an escape route. but there wasn't one. The evidence was too solid. The stakes too high. "This is blackmail," she said quietly. Trump smiled, that predatory smile I'd seen him use in negotiations before. "No, this is accountability. Something your Brussels bubble hasn't experienced in decades." Von der Leyen gathered her papers with mechanical precision. Her movements had lost all their earlier confidence. The transformation was striking, from imperial authority to cornered bureaucrat in under 15 minutes. "We will consider your proposal," she said, the words clearly bitter in her mouth. "You'll do more than consider it," Vance added. "We also want the immediate suspension of the Digital Services Act as it applies to American companies. Considerate compensation for the damage already done." That was the breaking point. Von der Leyen's face went completely white. The Digital Services Act was her signature achievement, her legacy project. Trump wasn't just demanding an apology, he was demanding she dismantle the regulatory framework she'd spent years building. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This meeting is over." "Yes, it is," Trump replied. "So is the special relationship, unless you fix this mess." Von der Leyen walked out without another word. No handshakes, no diplomatic pleasantries, no scheduling of follow-up meetings, just the sound of expensive heels clicking against marble as she fled. The moment the door closed, Trump's advisors exploded into action. Phones were pulled out, calls were made. The machinery of economic warfare was spinning up in real time. Within 30 minutes, the first rumors hit social media. Trump von der Leyen began trending globally. Unverified reports of a heated exchange and diplomatic crisis flooded Twitter and TikTok. The speculation was wild, but none of it came close to the reality of what I had just witnessed. By 4 p.m., the European markets were reacting. The euro dropped 2.1% against the dollar. German automotive stocks crashed. BMW fell 7%, Mercedes-Benz plummeted 8.5%, and Volkswagen lost nearly €1 billion in market value in a single afternoon. The 72-hour deadline wasn't just a negotiating tactic, it was a countdown to economic Armageddon. Inside the Brussels power structure, panic set in immediately. Emergency calls between Macron and Scholz were intercepted and leaked within hours. The French president was reportedly furious and demanding explanations. The German chancellor was described as seeking immediate clarification from von der Leyen's office. But von der Leyen herself had gone silent. No public statements, no press conferences, no leaked counter-narratives. Her communications team released only a brief statement about productive discussions with American partners. A lie so transparent it fooled no one. The silence spoke volumes. If the accusations were false, if the evidence was fabricated, we would have seen an immediate and aggressive rebuttal. Instead, we got damage control and deflection. Behind the scenes, the commission was in full crisis mode. Senior officials were working through the night, trying to trace the financial flows Trump's team had exposed. What they found terrified them. The wire transfers were real. The shell companies existed. The money trail led directly back to von der Leyen's signature on authorization documents. Meanwhile, Trump's team was preparing for every possible European response. If von der Leyen refused to apologize, the tariffs would hit Monday morning as promised. If she tried to rally other EU leaders against America, additional sanctions were ready to deploy. If she attempted to expose American intelligence methods, devastating leaks about other EU financial improprieties would flood the media. This wasn't a negotiation, it was a siege. The broader implications were staggering. For 75 years, the Atlantic Alliance had been built on mutual respect and shared values. Trump had just demonstrated that those days were over. Europe was no longer a partner. It was a client state that had forgotten its place. The psychological impact on European leadership was immediate and visible. These were people who had spent their careers believing in European power, European independence, European moral authority. Trump had just proven that when push came to shove, America still held all the cards. Von der Leyen now faced an impossible choice: submit to Trump's demands and be branded a collaborator by her own political base, or resist and watch the European economy burn under the weight of American tariffs. Either way, her political career was effectively over. The 72-hour clock was ticking, Brussels was scrambling, and I had witnessed the moment when the old world order didn't just crack, it shattered completely. The era of polite diplomacy was dead. The era of American economic dominance had returned with a vengeance. And Ursula von der Leyen, the woman who had once claimed to represent European sovereignty, was now just another politician learning the hard truth about who really runs the world. Some lessons can only be taught through humiliation. This was von der Leyen's masterclass. The question now wasn't whether she would comply with Trump's demands. The question was whether the European Union could survive the revelation that its most powerful leader had been caught red-handed interfering in American democracy. If this story changed your understanding of who really holds power in the transatlantic relationship, subscribe and hit the notification bell, because when that 72-hour deadline hits, we'll be here with the update you can't afford to miss. This analysis is based on fictional scenarios created for educational and analytical purposes.